Okay, good afternoon. It is 4:01 on October 25th. Steve Mazzacane podcast, and I'm glad you're here. Good to get going. We have no guest today, so it's just a conversation, primarily about the upcoming election, some other news items, things of that nature, and we'll give it a few minutes for people to log on. We had no podcast yesterday. We were pretty loaded last week with guests on, and I'll tell you, it's interesting seeing people who are relatively new to politics get involved because there's always this question that you have to ask when you have someone who's experienced politician versus someone new, and that is, what's the value of that experience, right? So, I live in Brantford. People that watch this live many of the towns in the area: North Brantford, East Haven, Guilford. And one of the first questions we ask from a representative is, what can you bring back to the district? And you always run the risk when you lose someone who's been in there for a while of putting someone new in there who does not have those connections. And so part of the questions that we ask when we see new people running is, why are you, and we have to ask ourselves as voters, will you still be able to be effective in Hartford? We may not like the game, but it's the game. And there's still rules of that game. You have to have those connections. You have to make those things happen. And so we have different levels. You have the Ray Ingrahams of the world who's running, but he's been Republican leader forever, the majority leader on the RTM, got major projects through town. So he's running, probably a little more experience than, say, a Paul Chrissy, who has been in town for 4 years, not served on town boards, that sort of thing. And there's benefits to both. Sometimes there's a benefit from a voter standpoint on somebody who has no experience in Hartford, is going up there just to hopefully change things, change the tenor. I talked to someone today, and we were talking about this, and the question is, well, if you don't start voting for people like that at some point, then when do you ever get change? And then the other question is, do you want change if that person is getting money back to your town, if they're getting benefits back to your town, if that's your focus? So it's a really interesting, there's no right or wrong answer often in elections. Sometimes there is. Sometimes there's just, this person does not belong on the ballot. And we saw that 2 years ago with the state rep race. Didn't belong on the ballot, shouldn't be there. And that the opponent won easily, rightfully so. Probably took a bunch of Republican votes with her for that reason. She's running again. Now you have two qualified candidates this year. State Senate race is interesting because you have somebody. I was actually intrigued by Paul Chrissy's interview. Went out a little longer because he may not be the best at articulating an argument, but if we can get through that, interesting positions on something very, very moderate. And in fact, I would say some issues he's pretty left. But that said, a couple things to talk about. We have always on this podcast, in my writing and on Brantford 7, when claims are made by elected officials about other elected officials, I believe it's part of our responsibility to point out the accuracy or inaccuracy of that. And so we have many residents send us mailers, flyers, statements made on social media. Some of the stuff on social media I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but I do have to point out this flyer here. This is from Ray Ingraham. I posted on the screen. He sent out this flyer on the issues regarding him and everybody sends this flyer out. This is a comparison flyer. Here's me and here's my opponent. They don't mention the opponent's name. That's not untypical. And then commitment to the community. So there's a few very specific statements made here, and we fact check those. And so one is, we see here, supports the police, supports local zoning control, and supports responsible spending and opposes tax increases. So we'll talk about those for a second. First of all, the first example he gives is that she voted for HB 6004 that hurt law enforcement. That was before the last election. That was the well-known bill. Police were very much against that bill. It was the one that removed qualified immunity basically for police officers. I can tell you police are very much angry about that bill. And she has spoken about that bill on this podcast. Yes, she did vote yes for that bill. She stands by that vote. Some changes were made later in a special session to that bill. It's part of the ongoing conversation, but that's true. Here's where it gets dicey, and not so much dicey as in some votes just didn't happen. Supports local control of zoning. This is the ongoing discussion about affordable housing in Brantford and on these shoreline towns. We've talked about it ad nauseum here on the podcast. So first, 6107. So 6004, I'm just taking notes here of what I looked up. 604, she voted yes. That's the police bill. So that's correct. 6107, she voted no. 6107 was about, there's a lot of things, but the big issue was accessory apartments. It basically said you can add an accessory apartment to your property as of right. You didn't have to go to zoning board of appeals to do it. So you just had an automatic right to do it. It's kind of an absurd law. Basically, it allows you to take, if you have a property with a house on it and you've got 2 or 3 acres and you can throw up 10 accessory apartments, you're allowed to do it. Like, it's just nonsense. No one has, as I know, has abused that law yet, so possibly hasn't been challenged in court. That can be a problem down the road. And for the record, that passed, but not with her help. She voted no. So in Ray's flyer, he says she voted for it, voted for HB 6107. That's not true. She did not vote for that. And then 611 and 6430, that overrides local control. 611, no vote was taken. 6430, also no vote was taken. And that was on not using criminal record to rent out apartments to people, not using that as a basis to not allow rental units. No vote was taken on that. So there's no question on that issue. The vote, what Ray has posted there and sent out, is not true. She did not vote for those bills. Then on the final one, supports responsible spending and opposes tax increases. They're just saying that she voted for the budget. That's fine. That's how it is. When you vote for budgets, they go up. You can say it's too much, tax increase, what have you. That's a much bigger issue. This is a little more vague, obviously. And a 43% pay increase for herself. You know, I'll go after Ray a little bit here. Unless you're running on removing that pay increase, it's kind of hard to send out a mailer trashing the pay increase, right? So they were paid not much money. I can attest to the fact that state reps do far more work than they're actually paid for up there. And I don't know if I would attack somebody on that increase when I think, you know, everybody benefits from it. Every Republican up there benefits from it too. Outside, I don't know anybody who said, no, please don't give me more money. The only person in the history of me covering politics who has ever said, no, I don't want to increase, is Jamie Cosgrove, who has never taken a pay increase in this town. So this is not a small thing. If you're going to send out a mailer and you're going to spend campaign money attacking your opponent, you have a responsibility to be accurate, and we have a responsibility to fact check that. And we did this, you know, in fairness. You say we're going after Republican, but we went after Tom Brockett last year when he publicly stated he voted for something where no vote ever took place. He just made it up. And so the same thing is here. Do I know where she stands on affordable housing from our interviews? I think she's more, her party is certainly more for the affordable housing law. She's in a tough spot. She was in a tough spot here with the Parkside project. I know people down there were pulling her in many directions. I know she went to her with many other Democrats were for it initially, before more facts came out. So it's a political football, that issue. She's kind of caught in the middle. I think Ray's kind of caught in the middle. No one, people with a brain are not for or against affordable housing, by the way. People who are intelligent people judge an application based on the merits of that application. No one says, oh, it's called affordable housing, we're against it. Where we have a problem as a town is we fall into this category where there's so many units we're not allowed to count, and therefore we're put at this disadvantage. The Parkside project in particular was a tough one because all of the arguments that the Parkside proponents yell and all the affordable housing proponents yell is it's based on racism. Every article in the Connecticut Mirror is somehow about, if you're opposing this, you're racist. It's based on racism in these wealthy white towns, which is nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. But that's what they all run to. And the argument and the problem in Branford was that it already was affordable housing. We already had very low income housing there. We already had multiple different races in that building, multiple age groups, a lot of seniors, but a lot of mentally ill. There was already crime in that area. So we had people coming into town and basically saying, if you're not for this, you're racist. And this is the racist town. Like, dude, we live here. Out this window, about 4 blocks is Parkside. We chose to live near Parkside, and now you're coming into our town calling us racist. So it was a high emotion application, primarily because it was absurd, some of the claims that were being made. So that said, there's a second thing we want to talk about in this race. How do I remove? I remove that. Okay. And the second aspect I want to talk about is the behavior of political campaigns during a race. You know, I looked at Christine Cohen's page, I looked at Paul Christie's page, I looked at Ray Ingraham's page, I looked at, all of the political candidates' page, and there's always people trolling. And by trolling, we're saying people that are going there just to start shit, right? They don't actually have legitimate political questions. There's some people that are like, well, you're on this vote, I can't vote for you because of this, or whatever. But there's people who are just starting stuff to start stuff. They're trolls. And they're members of the far left or far right. A lot of times they're members of their own party that, I don't like how moderate you are. You didn't support this bill or that bill or what have you. That's all fine. What's not fine, and what's representative of your campaign and your personal candidacy, is if people working for your campaign, representing you, are doing the trolling. And the example we have of this is, now I have an issue with Mark Riccio. I've always with Mark Riccio. He's an RTM member in town. He ran against Robin Comey a couple of years back. He sued Branford 7. He filed a lawsuit. We've hired an attorney, wrote a letter, and they withdrew their lawsuit. It was absurd. It was nonsensical, basically saying he got sick and there was an emotional damage because of something I said, which was true. Whatever. That said, he works on the Ippolito campaign for Judge of Probate. He is the public spokesman for Ippolito on many, many events, on fundraisers, at RTC meetings, at things all over town, and he is trolling his opponent like crazy, posting comments, asking absurd questions. And this, whether you like it or not, trolling is going to happen. Attacks are going to happen. But when they're direct representatives of a candidate, that's on you. Al Ippolito's a good man. He's qualified for the position. Actually, both of those guys are good guys, qualified for the position. I have an issue there because of Mark's on one side. I apologize so much. I forgot his opponent's name, and I'm not doing it on purpose. I just forgot his name. He's the attorney for someone, a criminal that I'm involved with. And he was arrested for something that was done that the Branford police were brilliant on. So in any event, I'm not taking sides in that race, but what I am saying is this. If a campaign is going to have members of its campaign publicly trolling the other side, Chuck Tiernan, thank you very much, Mary. That's on you. And Al, you seem like a great guy. I know you. I've known you for a while. You did fried dough with me in the booth. I appreciate that, but you have to rein in your people. And when you choose someone like Mark Riccio to speak for you, to be a voice for you, and then go on Facebook, on social media, and troll the opponent, that's on you. This isn't just your run-of-the-mill Republican going after somebody. This is your campaign trolling the other side. There's nothing cool about that. And that's on you. And it would be true of any candidate. If somebody who was running Robin Comey's campaign went to Ingraham's page, or vice versa, or somebody that was running last year, Brockett's campaign went to, and actually you might have Brockett's relatives going to, which was crazy, going to Cosgrove's pages last year. It's going to happen, but if it's in your campaign and you can't control what your own people are doing, it causes all of us to raise questions on your ability to pick people to represent you. If you've chosen Mark Riccio with his past to represent you, you get what you pay for. And that's on you. And that's not something Chuck Tiernan should have to deal with from the other side. If you have something to say to your opponent, put out a press release, put out a mailer, come on here and make the accusation where we can defend it and we can have him back on to defend those claims. But if you're going to have an operative of your campaign go on there and do that, that's on you. That's your problem. I'm not taking sides in that race for some personal issues, but this would be the case in no matter what it was. We saw it last year with Brockett against Cosgrove. No call for that. And that's representative and reflects on you as a candidate in your campaign and your ability to pick people that will represent you well on the campaign trail. Let's hope that ends. Something tells me it may not. So what do I think is going to happen in this election? I don't know. We go into all of these races in Branford, with the exception of Cosgrove, knowing that the Democrats have a significant advantage, right? We go in knowing Comey has an advantage. We go in knowing Cohen has an advantage. We go in knowing Tiernan has an advantage. That's just something we know. In the Guilford race, which were the former Sean Scanlon, that's not going to be a close race. I mean, there's just no way to break that down. It's with the political climate in Guilford after the Board of Ed race, and she had, by the way, a very impressive interview. It tells you something when the candidate can articulate an argument and understand an argument, even that she may not agree with. And I appreciated some of the things she came up with. We would still at some point like to have her opponent on, but he was not able to make it the day he was here. You may remember that a few weeks back, but she'll win that fairly easily. But the Comey-Ingraham race is probably the most interesting. I mean, Cohen race is interesting too, because it's such a contrast. But the Comey-Ingraham race is most interesting because there are two people that have been in Brantford for a while. You know, Comey has been involved politically, but involved on the BECC, involved with children's stuff for many years. I've known her for quite a long time. Ray Ingraham has been involved in everything in town. A lot of the projects you see, he helped push through the RTM. He's been in softball. These guys are an integral part of the Brantford community. And so you probably can't go wrong with either one of them. I know both of them. Robin, I know her passion for early childhood education. On Ray, I can tell you Ray is one of the truly good men I've ever met. He's just, I don't know if he has a bad bone in his body. It's just straightforward and honest and cares. One of the most sincere people I've ever met. But we still have to look at actual numbers. So we'll start with, here are the numbers from 2 years ago. And this is Comey versus Riccia. Now we have to remember that 2 years ago, this is, what year is it? 2022 was 2020. And that was a presidential election. And this was a presidential election that had the highest turnout in history. This was the presidential election where the losing candidate had the second highest turnout in history in Trump. And we are in very much not Trump territory. Actually, this race was anybody but Trump for a lot of these people. And Comey won fairly easily, of over 2,000 votes. This was an interesting night because this was the first election where early voting just dominated, just took over. And early as the numbers came back in, we didn't have absentee ballot numbers. But on the podcast that afternoon, I had said this election's over because the early numbers were in. And while we didn't know how those went, left or right, Comey or Riccio, we knew the amount of early voting, and we knew that favored Democrats. So when that number came in big, basically this race was over. But election night, you were getting same day voting results. And so the Republicans were, I believe, at Lenny's, and Robin Comey was in the center of town. I was at Comey's headquarters, and the numbers were coming in, and I'm getting reports from the Republican side saying, oh my God, they think they're going to win. Like, there's no way you're going to win. It's just not possible. And they were celebrating and they were happy, and all the numbers were coming in. They were cheering the numbers, but the numbers didn't include the absentees. And then the absentees came in and just wiped it all out. So there was never really a chance there. Riccio was not a good candidate. You had, midstream Republicans jumping ship from that. They probably ran actually a decent campaign. They didn't run a bad campaign. Just he was a bad candidate. And then Robin kind of wiped the floor with him. We're probably all better off for that. But a better race to look at is 4 years ago. This is not the presidential race. This is the governor race on the top of the ticket. So if we just go back here, 4 years ago, 11,081 votes. Last year, 14,029 votes. So 3,000 more votes, 25% more overall voters. That's a massive difference. So we go back to that Imparato race. Bob Imparato, good guy. Probably didn't have serious name recognition. Kind of quiet, and probably not a great campaigner. Really good guy, probably perfect in his role as tax collector of the town. But this is a fairly significant. Lonnie Reed was before Robin Comey, so she had Lonnie Reed with her. Lonnie was very bipartisan and liked by both sides. A pretty significant victory, over 1,000 votes, over 11,000 passed. So that's, a 10-point win is no small win. It's not insurmountable, but it's no small win. So let's just hypothetically say for a second, let's suppose the same amount of people vote this election, which is possible, right? 11,000. In order for Ingraham to make up this difference, he would need, well, what's the difference? We have 16 on that side, 97 on that side, 1,113 votes. So we need half of that to flip. So about 555, 556 votes to go from Comey to Imparato. or 556, some combination. There's five new voters come in and vote for Ingraham. Is that possible? Well, you have Ingraham with far more name recognition. You have Ingraham with a significant history on ballots, Republican leader. He is part of the Cosgrove team. He has worked closely with Jamie Cosgrove, and we know how popular he is and like how well liked he is across party lines. So can he make up 550? It's a big ask, but it's not insurmountable. It's not impossible. And so I would put Robin probably 70% to win right now. Seeing how early voting comes, if there's a ton of early votes, I would jock that number up a little bit. I'm guessing this gets closer, and it's going to be a very close race. I can't see this being a blowout. I would see it no matter what closer than the 20. This race is Comey and Parada race, but so it was a good race. And you know what? You know, it's funny when you have two local people. It appears to me now nasty attacks usually come late in the race, so maybe we're there, but maybe that will happen. But it appears to me we have two people running clean races for the most part. Ray did send something out that was incorrect on a vote. That was wrong. He should have checked it. There's no question about that. But there are things that have happened in the last few years, which, you know, I didn't bring up in the podcast. I don't think are relevant when interviewing these people. I want to talk about issues, but it seems like that's not an issue. And I think Robin should run on a record. Ray should run on his record and let the votes fly over. Now, remember, Robin has a massive advantage. There is a massive Democratic registration advantage in Brantford. But the town itself doesn't seem to be left. Seeing Cosgrove win, it was considered a Democrat light anyway, but they don't seem to be far left. This is more working class. You have more, you don't have the elitism that you may have, say, in Guilford, or that seems to be happening more and more in Madison. So that could be a very, very close race. That's going to be a very interesting race. Now let's go look at 2 years ago, Christine Cohen. Joe Laporta was a good guy. Not a bad, from a candidate, I mean, he was new. Like, he ran this, I'm an outsider, I want to change things. He ran kind of similar to what we're seeing Paul Christie run, although Paul Christie is putting a lot more money into his campaign. I think Christie is probably a little more energetic, probably running a more energized campaign. But Laporta was a good guy, a moderate guy. The problem in the Republican Party is it's hard to run as a moderate. You know, you either end up becoming the, Lenora Levy's, where you run far right to get the base fired up and then get likely going to lose fairly easily to Blumenthal. And if you run as a moderate, it doesn't really gain serious traction, doesn't gain energy on the Republican side. And so with a major registration advantage 2 years ago and a presidential race, Christine Cohen won. And she won primarily, well, I wouldn't say primarily, but led by massive numbers in Guilford. Guilford is going left, like as far left as you can get right now in its overall politics. Picked up Madison, which was always on the fence. Madison has moved further left. And there's Republican towns in this Senate district, but they're the smaller towns, your North Branfords of the world, which are overwhelmingly Republican, but there's just not enough of them to make a significant difference. But for this one, we also have to go back to this race was massive. This race was probably the best race I've ever covered from a strategic standpoint. It got nasty. It's the nastiest race. The last week of the campaign, to this day, I feel bad for Greenberg. I think there's still animosity towards Cohen regarding this. And I don't know if the things that were coming directly from her or the party, like a lot of the mailers that went out to all the Senate districts, not just this one. So it was the party really sending them. But there were a couple mailers late. I would tell, if 2 weeks out, I would have said Greenberg was going to win. I think polling probably showed that to both sides. And then in the last week or two, it got crazy nasty on guns, where Greenberg is a moderate. I don't think he owns a gun. He's very much a moderate. He basically said, I want to talk to all sides and get everybody's viewpoint. And Moms Demand Action just attacked him, just mercilessly. I remember their behavior at the debate was questionable. Like they were just making faces at him and comments at him the whole time. It was really not pretty. But what really I think got under Greenberg's skin, there was a couple things. One was Mailer went out supporting Cohen from Rosa DeLauro on health insurance, and Adam Greenberg's wife, Lindsay, sister, had died of cancer, and they were very much with her and raising money for health insurance stuff, socialized medicine kind of thing. And to see that, I think, just kind of was disheartening, and I could see why that's disheartening. Like, you had worked on this with Rosa DeLauro for many years. She had gone to your fundraisers. You had worked on getting more health care, getting more screening, all these issues, and she didn't even call her before the election, and they just blindly supported the Democrat. That's rough. That's not an easy thing to deal with. The second one was a disgusting mailer that basically blamed every Republican they sent it out for Newtown. And it was, I mean, Greenberg is as moderate as it gets. He falls into that same category that we talk about all the time, social liberal, fiscally conservative, and it was really, really ugly. So I think late that turned, Guilford overwhelmingly turned. Those moms, that group, like, had hundreds of people making thousands and thousands and thousands of phone calls, and the mailers were pretty disgusting. So it did get Christine in there. Again, I'm not accusing her of sending out these mailers. A lot came from the party. But we've talked about this many times. You can go back and see podcasts where we talk about this. So that was the race that we're looking at when we compare non-presidential years to non-presidential years. So can Paul Chrissy replicate what Greenberg did and then not make the same mistakes at the end? He's not going to have. Greenberg had a name recognition and was from Guilford. So he got crushed in Guilford for political reasons, but he also had some name recognition. He was known for people. He was known in the baseball community. He was from the area. He had celebrity status because he had been a Major League Baseball player. So he knocked down 1 million doors. Christie's doing that as well. They have people going out there. They're spending money on people going out there. They're spending money on marketing. I don't know if he'll be able to make it as close as Greenberg. I'm not counting it out. It appears that this election is kind of a sense of apathy. It may not have energy really on either side. So it may get down to get out the votes type thing. I don't see Democratic sides going crazy. I don't see the base just going nuts. I don't see a ton of energy. That helps a challenger. But it's unlikely. He's still an underdog. He knows he's an underdog, but he's going to make a push late. So it's interesting what we're comparing it to. We're not really looking at 2 years ago. We're looking at 4 years ago. And both of the races are, if we go back and say that Ingraham is more name recognition than Imperato and more long-term base, he has daughters here, softball, sports, every major nonprofit in town has gone to him for the RTM. Every project has gone to him. Can he pick up the 550 or so votes that would need to come from Robin and go to Ingraham? Is it possible? Yeah, it's possible. It's not, and I wouldn't say it's crazy. Robin Comey is still going to be have the advantage of registration, but it's not impossible for that to happen. That's going to be a very interesting race. If you're not paying attention, that's a race, coming into the stretch you should pay attention to. And the other one is, the question is, does Paul Chrissy have an ability to make up ground just a little bit more than Greenberg did? That's a tough one, because he doesn't have anywhere near the name recognition that Adam Greenberg did. And so, Greenberg got that close in a very, very close election. I would say they won this by 2.8 points, right? 51.4 to 48.6. I would say in the last week and a half to 2 weeks, there's probably a 4-point shift in that number. Greenberg, if the election was taken, if the election day was 2 weeks earlier that year, Greenberg would have been your state senator. Now, that may have only lasted until you got to 2 years later, when the anti-Trump sentiment swept through and no Republican was going to win. But we're not there. We're back to that Cohen-Greenberg race. And can Christie pull that out? The one advantage he's going to have is there's a lot of money being spent. He's going to outspend Cohen. Looks like at least 2-1, and that can give you a chance. Money gives you a chance. These last week and a half is when the nastiness comes out, and usually the person behind gets the nastiest. So we'll see if any of those candidates start going, and we'll be talking about that here on the podcast, take those steps, which are pretty drastic, late in a race to try to pull it out. So that's our analysis so far. So basically, if you're a betting person, you're probably betting on the Democrats to win everything, but you're going to be bet on the Democrats to win everything in this district every year anyway. That's just the way it is. Unless you have a name like Cosgrove, that's just the way it's going to be. But Brantford is kind of moving more towards the middle. It's not a far left town by any means, despite a significant registration advantage by the Democrats. So, how do I get this? This is Cohen Greenberg. Okay, so that's the discussion for today, but that's just where we stand on the election. And so it can go any way. It's going to be fun to watch. I think I got to decide where to be election night, and I try to decide based on, what race is going to be close and that sort of thing. I am not planning on having the candidates for judge of probate on for personal reasons. Either one of them I don't want to do. I don't want to have to ask them questions about things that I'll just say this. There's this belief coming from one side that in order to be a judge of probate, you should only have worked on judge of probate issues. And I have covered the judge of probate. I've covered issues that Judge Forgione has been in. Your standard probate stuff is housing and families, and this mediating voice between sometimes families going at each other or what to do when people pass away. But not always. For example, when Foote Park went from private hands to public hands owned by the town, that was managed and handled by the judge of probate. Like, the judge of probate is not just family things. It's not just housing. It's a lot more than that. And so both of these attorneys, in my opinion, are very qualified. I would say Ippolito has more specific probate experience. That said, probate itself doesn't just handle specific probate things. It can be helpful to have experience outside of just probate, which Tiernan has a lot more of, but so does Ippolito. Ippolito has handled a lot of lawsuits locally, a lot of things that his name has been on as an attorney that have not just been probate issues. So this question of qualifications is a nonsense one. They're both extremely qualified. They're both extremely well respected. Every person I talk to, every lawyer I talk to speaks highly of everyone involved. Both of those guys. So I don't think we can go wrong. Tiernan has a registration advantage, certainly probably has a name recognition advantage. But because Judge of Probate is also North Brantford, there'll be a significant Republican advantage in North Brantford. So the question is, can Ippolito keep the numbers close in Brantford that North Brantford can make up the difference? In any event, we're losing a really good judge in Judge Forgione. Let's hope either one of those fill those shoes in a strong and positive way. Okay, for today, we're going a little bit over, so we'll let it go. Tomorrow, there's no interviewee, no candidate here on the podcast tomorrow, but Thursday will be Christine Cohen, and then we'll figure out where we go from there for next week. So, guys, I hope you enjoy the rain. Have a really good Tuesday night, and until I see you tomorrow,